to Be Cube Sunday morning, and it is an indeed special Sunday morning. Uh, we have with us Ellen Datlow and Phyllis Irene Radford. Now, as you know, Phyllis is an integral part of BQ Press. Without her, we would be uh, Bob's once. Bob had an idea once, as opposed to BQ Press. So, and with us we have Ellen Datlow. Now, Ellen, I probably have remember her more than she remembers me, because she was a guest. I got her convinced her to be a guest at RadCon one year,
I
and
remember that.
yeah, and I kind of followed her around,
I
and
think
I
that's the one
watched.
time I actually got to meet Ellen.
Yeah, I
Okay.
watched the master at work, sitting in a room full of people, literally just circled around her at her feet as if Gandhi had come to the con, and carrying on just a great conversation with the people, giving feedback and uh, schooling them occasionally on the best way to talk to an editor, about an editor, interact with an editor. And I just was like sitting there with my ears open, and it was a blessing to be able to see you in action, Ellen.
Well, thank
So
you.
um, I don't
And
know.
I thank you for taking me to the tissue repository. The
Say again.
I thank you for taking me to the tissue repository. Me and Eileen Gunn. Remember the at RadCon? We went to the I forget the repository.
Oh
Yes,
yeah,
out at Hamford. Yeah.
Yes, it was fabulous.
yeah. It's a fun place out there. I don't work out there anymore, and uh, oh, I hear Karen Anderson has come in to join us. So, guys, here comes Karen. Good
Hi,
morning,
Hello.
Karen. You
Karen.
finally made it.
Welcome to the show. Uh, and so, anyway, we were just going through the introductions of Ellen as okay. I'm going to ask the question because I'll bet you. Do you know how many Hugos you've got stacked on your shelf?
No,
Yeah, I bet Karen does.
and I do you? I don't know. I mean, I look things up. That's why I use the Locus Awards thing. I can figure out. I can remember how much. I think I have 10 World Fantasy Awards. That's all I know.
And that I saw those too.
Mhm.
You are an award-winning in a serious way.
Yeah, this is how important Ellen is to our industry, is that Tom Whitmore is crowding in with Karen Anderson
Hi,
just
Tom.
to
I
be
haven't seen
part
you
of
in
a
ages.
show.
Yeah. So yeah, it is a wonderful world where you can have Tom Whitmore, Phyllis Irene Radford, Karen Anderson, and Ellen Datlow all on the same screen. Um, it's great. So, Karen, I know that you've got a question sitting right there on your pad uh, that you want to use to lead off and ask. So go ahead.
What I did was I went and looked at a bunch of other interviews that Ellen had done, and I wanted to. I noticed that she gets asked the same questions over and over and over and over, but I figured I would actually ask one of them over again and sort of get it updated. And I want to ask you, if people talk a lot about what the definition of horror is, and I've seen you give some really good definitions of it, but I wanted to ask you if you think it has changed at all over the past 10 or 15 years from an editorial viewpoint, what you define as horror or what you're seeing coming across your desk.
Oh, wow. My definition hasn't really changed that much. I see things that are being called horror or that are have new supposed subgenres that I don't really get, like grimdark, which is some kind of weird dark fantasy, which to me is just horror. So I mean, I'm seeing people, but this happens every few years. People try to redefine things or just create more niches because they don't fit. They don't think that what they're writing or what they're reading fits the niche that exists. But horror is so broad that I think it's a huge umbrella with all different kinds of material, from terror tales to supernatural to science fiction horror. I don't know if you need any more niches beyond that. And people say, well, what's the difference? What's dark fantasy, and how the real question that people ask me is, what's the difference? I think the difference is between dark fantasy and horror, and that, again, I don't think it's changed. To me, dark fantasy has a more upbeat or joyous or exuberance feel to it. It's tonal. And horror, you don't get that. You don't, I mean, when I consider something horror, I don't consider it, yeah, I get joy in reading it maybe, but it's not going to have, usually it won't have a happy ending. It'll have the very best, a neutral ending. Okay, it can have an ending. It can have an ending where people survive and things are good again, but they're never going to go back to normal in a horror story.
When I first started in the business too many years ago, I had horror defined me as at the end leaves the characters with no hope. Whereas dark fantasy, you have an element of hope at the end. Can you say anything about that?
Well, it depends on what you mean by hope. Hope as far as they're going to survive and they're going to flourish. I think you can have horror that will do that. But it's not the kind of hope you're going to have in a dark fantasy where things are going to go back to normal or things are going to get really good. So there's that difference. Again, it's tonal. Horror is often, not always, nihilistic. It's the universe is out to get you and it's not going to let up. Maybe you survive this particular time in the barrel, but it doesn't mean you're going to survive the next time. That's it's like, okay, I think this is horror. I think that's horror. I think this is not horror. Basically, I can give examples. I mean, that's what I usually do. As far as things have changed, do you mean, Karen, did you mean the definition has changed in the last 10 years or what I see?
I'm actually, I'll be frank. Bob and I deal a lot in politically themed horror.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious as to whether that is something new or increasing due to the political extremities of the world right now, or if that is something that has a lot of roots, say in the World War II era or in Vietnam. What was there more politically themed horror, or is it now that it is coming out more?
To me, I'm trying to think if I don't see it overtly political. I mean, every piece of fiction is political in some way. It's going to reflect the point of view of the people who are writing it and the era that it's being written in. I don't see it as more overtly political, but maybe I'm just not seeing what you're seeing. I mean, you're doing specific anthologies looking for that.
Yes.
I don't see that. I mean, I see more concerns from people in marginalized groups. More people from marginalized groups are writing horror and are being lifted up for all of us to read. That's changing. And that's political as much as anything else. So in that sense, that new writers are coming into the field who are bringing their own experiences that are going to be they're going to be political in some way. So in that sense, yeah, I mean, in the last 5 to 10 years, I'm seeing more of that. But overtly political, I don't think so.
Okay.
And I'd rather not. I mean, I don't want to read. I don't want to read a diatribe against a particular type of person or a group, because it's boring. I mean, it's got to be. It's fine if it's in there, and it should be in. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it being in there, but it has to serve the plot.
I was looking at it more as a setting issue. And I was thinking back to, I was surprised to discover a few years ago when Greg Bear was doing an anthology that he had written a short story in which people have an unexpected encounter with someone who turns out to be a Nazi. And that surprised me a great deal.
Okay, that was his story, and how recent?
Yes, it was in the anthology, the collection that his daughter edited a few years ago.
What was the name of the story?
I cannot remember.
but that's
I
something that, Stephen King did that, with Pupil, yes, and that's overt evil, however you want to define it. So that's, that is done. That's a way to handle it.
Yeah.
Or not knowing that someone's evil and
Yeah.
then realizing it.
We have a comment from a viewer, Susan Caro, wondering if some Philip K. Dick would be considered political horror.
Well, certainly, I've got, the one, the one, oh God, the one that was made into a TV series.
The Man in the High
Thank you
Castle.
very much. Yes, The Man in the High Castle. I haven't read.
There are a lot of
Dick. I love
stories
that.
too.
I love that book. That is one of. I haven't read that much Dick, but I like that particular. I have read that and I loved it. I don't remember the tone of it very well. So I don't know if I would consider it horror. It's dystopian. Dystopian can overlap with horror. You get dystopian enough, and yes, it's horror. But dystopian fiction is its whole other thing.
Yeah.
I think.
The Facebook user is asking societal horror.
Is that the question?
That's all they wrote.
Is that a good term for it?
Yeah, sure, why not? That's an interesting term for it. Sure, I have nothing against it. The circumstances you're living in but that isn't all horror societal horror. It's what society you're living in and how it influences what's going on around you. So you're just.
I think they mean in opposition to the don't go down into that basement in the haunted house horror. More like don't go out onto the street in this situation horror.
Lovecraft's horror wasn't particularly societal, for example.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. So, my first introduction, which was a bad one, to horror were slasher films, where the emphasis is on the gore rather than the fear and learning about yourself in order to overcome the disaster that you've encountered. Being slasher films, the emphasis is gore rather than plot or character. Do you find that in written fiction as well?
I don't read that. That I guess you would call that splatterpunk, which I actually won a splatterpunk award, which shocked me for my body horror anthology, Body Shocks. But I don't read that, or we call it extreme horror. I don't have any interest in that. To me, and I never watched slashers, or hardly ever.
Well, after that first introduction, I just turned off horror altogether.
I think that era of filmmaking kind of put a real damper on horror. I think it turned a lot of people off to the variety of what horror can be. And I think that it really damaged the field for a while until people got over it, until readers realized it's not the only thing out there. It's not the only type of movie out there. There's nothing wrong with gore, but if it's only gore, if it's just about, torture porn you have. I personally have no interest in that. And I do think that those movies harmed the field.
Yeah.
Literature field, because it turned a lot of people off horror, what they think is horror, and you have to go and turn around and say, no, Shirley Jackson is horror. This is horror too. It doesn't have to be slasher. It doesn't have to be torture porn. There's a lot of stuff going on that can be, if you want to call it quiet horror, I guess. If it's it's like the non-eviscerating horror. Evisceration's fine too in its place. I just watched The Prophecy last night and I loved it. The one years ago with Christopher Walken and Viggo Mortensen as the devil. And there's gore in there. Gore is fine, but to have it the point of the movie or the point of the story, which I think is not so great. I don't appreciate it, and I think most readers and a lot of moviegoers don't appreciate it. On the other hand, a lot do. Those movies make money, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about Halloween and that. I'm talking about beyond those, more recent, the ones that are
I found a lot of Clint Eastwood's spaghetti, Clint Eastwood, well, whoever, yeah, a lot of his spaghetti westerns, where there was just too much blood. I mean, uh, that those just turned me off as well. Real, they might have been realistic, but as far as I was concerned, the vast gallons of blood that were spilled and shown to be spilling made them horror to me.
But does that, well, yeah, but does that mean you wouldn't want to watch Westerns in general? It doesn't mean you'd be turned off totally against Westerns.
Yeah,
Right?
well, Clint Eastwood just, I was very careful about what I watched of his after that. Catch us up on the comments. Liam Westcott, who's a regular here, I find that a lot of alternate history novels are dystopian nightmares that are horror novels in their own right because
Sure.
they present scenarios that are often horrific.
Yes, that's
Okay.
true. I think it depends on the horrific, how much horrific. I mean, there, as I said, there's science fiction horror. Alien is definitely one of those.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mentioned.
in fact, we have a comment from Liam again. Alien is a sci-fi movie on its surface, but really is a horror movie.
It's not, but it's really a horror movie. It's both. There's
Yeah.
no difference. I mean, the science fiction horror is a subset of horror, and
Yeah.
it's science fiction. I mean,
Fa-
since
Facebook user, your name is not showing. King's The Running Man, lots of gore, but a really dystopian society.
well, again, that's science fiction horror. I haven't read it, so I don't know.
I don't either.
So if people are used to certain kind of tropes that we've heard about for horror, but when I go to read horror now, I'm seeing very, very different settings and very different
approaches.
very different plots. Could you give a quick suggestion of 3 or 4 short stories or novels or writers that people who may have backed away from horror in the past but are interested in what's going on now, what they might look at the cutting edge now?
Oh boy, I don't read that many novels. Okay, I read mostly stories.
Then give us authors with short stories.
Well, Stephen Graham Jones is terrific. Now he does write some gore. I mean, he's prolific, and he writes all kinds of stories. He even writes science fiction sometimes, and I think his work is terrific. His novel Mongrels, which is about a coming of age werewolf novel, is really excellent. I don't remember how much gore there is. I don't remember, or I don't think it's over the top or anything. Same thing with his Angel Lake trilogy, I think it's called now. I'm sorry, Bob just commented. I think the Every Good Indian, which is not the Only Good Indian, which is his novel that was originally called Elk-Headed Woman, is about revenge. That's really good. And now the thing is, his Angel Lake trilogy, Don't Fear the Reaper, is it's his love letter to slashers. So people who don't, although it doesn't feel like a slasher novel, so people might or might not. I wouldn't start with that. Let's put it that way. Okay. But anyway, he's a really good writer, and he writes all kinds of stuff that's terrific. Liz Hand's new haunted, the house on the haunted house. I forget what it's called exactly, but it's not exactly a sequel, but it's written in the Haunting of Hill House world, and it's a tribute to Jackson's book and to Jackson, and I think that it's the estate really approved, and I think it's really good. And my whole book, When Things Get Dark, is a Shirley Jackson anthology with stories inspired by Shirley Jackson. There's a lot out there. I mean, it's hard for me to, if you pick up any of my best horror of the year, if you just look at the summary of the year, you can see all the stuff that I recommend. And usually, I think that a lot of it is, it's terrific, and it's not. The stories I pick are really good. Sometimes I pick stories that are gory. I try to get a really good variety in that particular book. But if you want to start with stories, I mean, just pick up. If you don't want to buy the anthology, just look at the table of contents. You can find writers who I recommend, who I think are really good.
Okay. What about some folks maybe outside the U.S. and England,
Oh, well,
coming from other
there's,
cultures?
I mean, there are plenty. I mean, Kim Newman has written a whole bunch of stories and alternate Dracula books, which are wonderful. I've only read like one or two because as I said, I mostly read stories and novellas, but he's someone to pick up. Graham Joyce, who unfortunately died a few years ago, wrote some excellent horror novels. Oh boy, Simon Bestwick is someone who writes really good short stories, who I publish sometimes. I can't believe Tuttle has a new collection out. She's a really excellent horror. She's an American who moved to England years ago, and she writes excellent horror. Of course, you put me on the spot. The story, the novel by Sophie White, Where I End, I think it's called, that just won the Jackson Award. It's an Irish novel, and it's by a woman who has written chick lit before. And this is her first horror novel, and I pushed it. I read it. It was from an Irish publisher, and they didn't want to send me a review copy because they said, well, we don't publish in America. Why should we send you a review copy? But I actually bought it because it sounded intriguing. I got it before Book Depository went under, so I was able to get cheap shipping at least. And it's terrific. I mean, it's body horror, it's family horror, familial horror, domestic horror, and it's brilliant. And it's not gory, but it's disgusting. It's body horror, so it describes some really horrible body. It opens with this whole body thing where someone's taking care of someone. All right. Then I highly recommend that. There are dozens of things I recommend. I mean, It's hard for me, putting me on the spot. I'm just like, who should I recommend? I don't know.
Well, I want to ask you something. Is you work with all these authors? You're their editor, and a lot of people who follow this this cast are writers.
Mm-hmm.
Is it stressful to be a horror writer, to be dealing with this sort of stuff all day? Is it difficult? Is it hard on people to write horror, or is it wonderfully expressive and
well, I don't know. I'm not a writer. I'm an editor. I read it all the time. And what I'm reading for is stuff that I really like. I mean, what's enervating is reading mediocre material over and over and over again. I mean, that's just exhausting. I get lots of anthologies. I think I've gotten probably more than I've gotten in the past. I get at least 100. At least I counted them up at one point. I have two readers. I have a reader who reads for me, who's in the Pacific Northwest. She reads electronic stuff that probably isn't going to have horror, like Strange Horizons. She'll look at some of it. And she'll look at Lightspeed and things like that. And I have a reader here in New York or in New Jersey who reads things that are print that probably won't have horror, or that sometimes I'll hand over anthologies in which I've never heard of any of the writers or the editors. So I figure I may do a spot check, read one story. And if I think I like it, I'll maybe read some more. Otherwise, I'll give her to look at for me. So there are hundreds. I was counting them up for her. There's 100 anthologies out there that I have to at least be aware of and look at. And, like with any editor, I mean, you're editors, some of you, and, you read, when you're reading for an anthology, I assume you have open markets. I don't, but consider the best of the year as an open market. And so you're reading everything, and it's like blah, 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 blah. And then whoops, oh, that's great. So, I mean, you're still finding the gems. And even though things are published, yeah, right. Someone's saying sitting through a lot of dirt to find the gems. Yes, thank you. And even though they're published dirt, they're still dirt.
Which brings me to a problem that Bob and I ran into, where we received a story for an anthology that kind of fit the anthology, but it was very poorly written, and it was just left a bad taste in our mouths. So we rejected it. Next anthology, we get the same exact story. I think she changed one comma. We rejected it again. Third time we rejected it, we'd run out of polite responses and just said, the writing is not up to snuff. We do not want to see this story
Wait a
ever
minute,
again.
Same story she would send you. Well, what did you say the first time? Did you say
The first time said it doesn't something of that it's just not right for the anthology. Be polite. First anthology, we'd never rejected anyone else before. And comes back a second time. Sorry, we don't like this story. Third time.
I mean, when you say you don't like the story, so that's it.
Third time it comes back. The writing is not up to snuff. We do not want to see this story again.
Okay.
It's like the famous story of rejecting a book by saying twice, and then they sent it in again and said, "Dear sir, we cannot use this paper. It has writing on it."
Yeah. And then she had the audacity to send it a fourth time. At which point we said, if this story crosses our desks again, you will be blackballed from this publishing.
What did she say? Did she have did she say something when she submitted it? I mean, what was the cover letter?
I don't remember that. I just remembered how.
I mean, how could she do that? I mean, I don't understand how someone would do that.
I don't either. A rejection is, send it somewhere else. But, fourth time we had to threaten her with blackballing for that story. But the funny thing is, eventually we did buy something from her, just not that story.
But her behavior is just bizarre. I'm sorry. It's really strange.
Yeah.
I mean, I blackballed her way before that.
Yeah. But, we were a new publisher at that point and we didn't want to offend anyone.
There's a right to be odd. Yeah. It's like, yeah. If someone doesn't take, if you, once you say, I just don't like it, there's nothing more you can do with that story to that,
Yeah.
I mean, send it to someone else, but don't send it back if I say I don't like it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
This was before AI, but we have a Facebook user who's saying maybe it was an AI submission.
Ellen, I have to ask, were you involved with the book How I Became a Horror Writer, a Krampus story?
No, I went, oh yeah, Lucky Girl. But yeah, Mary Ricker,
Yes.
that was my novella. I mean, I acquired it and edited for tour.com. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, because you usually do anthologies. This was a little different, and it's a seasonal novella.
It was. Well, I mean, I acquire short stories for tour.com and I acquire novellas for tour.com and for Nightfire. And Mary Rickard has published, I mean, I've known her for a long time. I published a couple of her stories in the past. I know I took some for the best horror of the year, and her novella, she sent us novella. And the funny thing is, I think she said she doesn't consider herself a horror writer. I said, Mary, are you crazy? I said, Mary, what do you think Lucky Girl was? And also she wrote the story that I reprinted. She was, when she was good, it was about a little girl who tortures fairies. And I reprinted in the best of the year. I said, how could you say you're not a horror writer? What the heck do you think you're writing? But anyway, yes, it's a really good Krampus story. I mean, it combines, various themes of getting together for Christmas, people who don't have a place. It's too complicated to describe. I mean, I'm really bad at describing the whole story. But I mean, it starts with people who seem to be strangers who decide to meet for Christmas. They have a meet at someone's house and they give each other gifts and things happen. And then there's some stuff in the past that comes up. I mean, it's just really creepy. And yes, it's a Christmas story. I mean, I didn't buy it as a Christmas novella. I mean, but and I don't think it came out in December either. I think it came out at some random time of the year. However, I do have a Christmas story coming out on tour.com December 15th or 18th or something by Lindsay Manusos, I think her name is. And that didn't come in. It didn't come in. I don't ask for a Christmas story. I just asked for, once in the past we have been asked, can you get a story for such and such thing? And it's like, so I scramble and get in touch with some writers. Say, hey, can you write something in like 3 weeks for such and such date, for this thing that's happening? And some of my writers, like Stephen Graham Jones, is very fast and can do that. But Lindsay's story just came in randomly. She's someone, I don't remember how I got in touch with her, but she started sending me some stories. I usually, she must have been recommended by someone or something. But anyway, so the story came in and I thought, oh, it's perfect for Christmas. But we were actually running into next year already. It wasn't going to be, normally it would not be published for Christmas. But our production person said, hey, this is a great story for Christmas. Let's put it in Christmas time. Because in December, traditionally, Tor.com stopped publishing stories for a few weeks to give everyone a break. So I don't think for the last 2 or 3 years, we had any stories in December. I can't remember. But the production person said, why don't we put it? It's perfect for December. I said, okay. So I had to edit it quickly and everything. So yes, it's an actual Christmas story, horror, definitely horror, that's coming out December, whatever, 15th or something, And then, and as far as getting stories for the right time of the year, we're closed for submissions, but then our production person said, hey, we decided we want to have some weird stuff for October. Can you get, and she told me, I I freelance consult for Tor.com, and so does Jonathan Strawn and Ann Vandermeer. And then anyone who works at Tor can also acquire stories. But Nancy contacted me and Jonathan, and Ann said, hey guys, we would like 3 stories for October. That would horror stories. Can you get some? So of course we're all scrambling to get people to write them for us quickly. And I think I won. No, I got at least 2 of mine were picked, where I got in time, and I was able to get people. Stephen Graham Jones was able to do it really quickly. And the other people, Jeff Ford didn't get his in it. He got one in. I can't remember if it's in time or not. But anyway, so I forget what the point was. But yes, Lucky Girl was a Christmas. Indeed, it was a Christmas story. Horror, very much horror.
Yeah. We had a question a little bit ago. A Facebook user is wondering along the lines of horror writing and corralling that so you don't jump at every shadow. But panning for gold comes to mind with your descriptions. How do you separate yourself from the work so that you don't jump at every shadow?
It doesn't scare me. I mean, the thing is, the funny thing is, okay, back when I was at Omni, when Clive Barker was starting to publish, and actually we published we were the first American magazine to ever publish him. Although he published in England, he came to lunch, and we had a book column editor, Murray Cox, who did not read horror at all. The 3 of us went to lunch, and Murray said, how can you write that? It scares me. I can't read it. It scares me. And like Clive and I are looking at each other. It's like, what? He said it would give him nightmares. It doesn't give me nightmares. I don't care. It's not real. It doesn't. I mean, there are very, very few stories that I read that linger with me enough to make me really upset. I mean, there are some stories that are upsetting, but not for that reason. I mean, there's a classic story that I actually have an anthology coming out next year from Tachyon called Fears, and it's all psychological horror. Mm-hmm. And there's one story in there that I read years ago that's an old story. And that one, I mean, there's stories that linger that create because they're so real. I mean, the supernatural doesn't scare me, but psychological horror to me is much more to me, it's not effective. I mean, I love supernatural horror, but it may affect me more because I know it's actually possibly could happen. Well, supernatural horror doesn't bother me at all that way because I don't think it's going to happen. So psychological horror is, as I said, it's for me, it's more if it's scary at all, and it's usually not scary to me. I don't look for scares in my horror. I mean, I look to be unsettled, and something can continue to unsettle you and disturb you for a very long time, but it doesn't bother me reading it. I don't get nightmares from that. I get travel nightmares, like I can't find my fucking hotel, excuse me, or I can't the key to something. It's like, the other night I had a travel horror. It's like, where the hell is my hotel room? Where am I?
Yeah.
And where's my phone? Things like that. So I don't get nightmares from horror, from writing, from reading.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
I would think, I'm guessing that most people who really love and embrace horror do not have that reaction. People who do have the reaction don't want to read it because they have that reaction. So I think it's a whole different, I mean, I can't explain the psychology behind it, but I think it's a whole different group of people who will constantly read horror or watch it, from people who don't like it, and maybe it's because it's too close to home.
Yeah. I was on an internet forum once with with a horror editor. And she said she loved reading horror because it was comic relief from reality. And, which is a different take altogether. And I'm kind of happy I don't live her life. But anyway, and Bob is asking what thoughts Tom has, because he's there, but he's just sort of sitting there.
That's because both of you are too good at asking questions, and Ellen, of course, is an excellent person at answering them. I was thinking about the question of YA/juvenile horror, which is a whole genre unto itself.
I have a problem with it. I don't think it works to me. I mean,
doesn't work as horror, or it doesn't work
as horror. I don't read much of it. Okay, I have occasionally been given more middle, the goosebumps type things, and I don't find it creepy. I mean, to me, it's too obvious. It's too it's not subtle enough. It's overt and it's boring. But I can't judge it all, I'm sure. And the same thing with YA horror. What is a YA horror story? I don't know. As far as short stories, I have no idea. And how is it different from an adult horror story? Is it just the age of the protagonist? Is it that you can't have gore? I mean, I'm not sure I know the difference. I don't know enough about it. But it's like comedic horror. There is humorous horror. Usually for me, I don't find it horrific. It doesn't work for me as a horror at all. But once in a while, there's a story that is funny, that has funny elements in it that really do get you. There are things, Chuck Palahniuk, for example. Some of his stories are really disgusting, but they're also pretty funny, some of them. I mean, the situations. I don't know if you ever read any of the stories like Guts or Hot Potting. I mean, they're things they're more satirical, I guess, than funny. I mean, they're disgusting, but but he doesn't deliberately write humor. I mean, some of his stuff I think is just sarcastic.
I think Neil Gaiman definitely has strong veins of humor in his in stuff he writes that is pretty horrific.
But he doesn't write. He writes some really excellent horror, but he doesn't write that much horror. I mean, he usually writes fantasy and dark fantasy. He has written straight out horror, and I mean, there's a poem that I published in one of my anthologies in Off Limits, I think. No, it couldn't have been that long ago. Maybe it was, called Eaten. And it's a movie script, and it's not funny at all. And it's really great, horrific kind of little movie script. So, so can you name a story of his that is?
I was actually thinking of one of the subplots in Good Omens, which has not turned up on screen with Good Omens, but was definitely in the books, involves a corrupt publisher and producer who horrible things happen to him. And because he is such a stereotypically awful business person, you find it humorous and enjoyable to watch these disgusting things happen to the man.
Right. Okay. I read the book decades ago.
Yes.
And I don't remember that character at all. I don't remember anything about it except what I said. The movies, the TV series is wonderful. I love it.
Yes.
There were also some interesting bits of humor in Resume with Monsters, the William Browning Spencer, which is a very horrific book, but there's a great deal of...
No, William Browning Spencer is good, and I wish he would write more. He hasn't written anything in ages.
Yeah, it's true. Unfortunately.
While we still have time, I noticed a lot of interviews with Ellen have talked about women in horror, women as writers, women as editors. And the other night, Tom and I were watching something pretty terrifying, The Murder at the End of the World.
Oh, I haven't seen it. I've heard about
And
it.
I noticed Rebecca Roanhorse is
Oh.
one of the
Script editor.
script showrunner. Anyway, she
Yeah.
has a very major role in that. And
Really?
yeah, that sort of surprised me because I hadn't really associated her with horror. But it is a terrifying thing.
Mhm.
It's more mystery thriller than terror than horror, I think. But
There's blood everywhere anyway.
Well, it doesn't necessarily mean horror, you know.
no.
It's got the basement scene anyway.
Yeah.
We'll argue about that later.
I mean, they can be horrific. Let me just for a second hold that thought. There can be horrific scenes and pieces in things that are not overall horror. Okay, there's dark fantasies that has horrific things in it. Okay.
And an awful lot of mystery has horrific things in it.
Yes. And some, if it's dark enough, it's horror. It's like Silence of the Lambs horror. But go on.
I'll be interested in hearing Ellen's views after she's seen the show.
I don't know when I'll see it. It depends on if it shows up on something I have, which is not much. Yeah.
It's on Hulu.
But talk to us a little bit about women in horror and sort of how that trajectory has gone. Because there are obviously very prominent women in it now. Have there always been, or has this been something that has fluctuated?
It's fluctuated, I'd say. In the excuse me, in the 1900s. I think in the 1900s, it wasn't that when there was a major, all these women writing ghost stories, and
the Gothic comes out of
Gothic
female.
Was mostly female, mostly, and then that faded, and then for a long time. There weren't many women in horror, you know. I mean, and it depends again how you define horror versus Gothic versus whatever. You know, is it horror? Is it dark fantasy? Whatever. But there was a dearth of women, I think, when I got into the field, which was around 1985 in horror. I mean, I started Omni, but I was not editing much horror then. Let's say late 80s. There weren't that many women writers, and
there were a fair number. Kathy Koja.
That's one.
Yes, but there were.
Yes, there were.
That's
some.
The one that comes instantly.
I'm just saying there weren't compared to how many there are now. There were not.
No.
You know, there are many more now, and there weren't that many editors. I mean, Jeannie Cavallis. I forget when. I don't know when Delabis started, but that would have been Kathy's first novel. Also, The Cipher was at Delabis. There weren't that many female editors, but when there were, I mean, we got slammed. I remember Richard Lehman wrote in some fanzine. He was really pissed off at me, Linda. Oh my God, it was a friend of mine. I haven't seen her in years. Who worked at Shakespeare and Company. She's married to Kaz. Linda.
Oh, yes.
Murata. She was a critic. She wrote reviews. He slammed me, her, and I don't know if Paula Garan was writing then, but he slammed us all because we didn't like his work. And he he attacked us, the three women who didn't care for his work, you know. And it's like, okay. And when Terri Windling and I, when we were doing the year's best, one time some stupid person said that the stories were mostly by women. I mean, you know, too many women in this book. And it turned out there were still more men than women, but any amount of women seemed like too many. You know, so there was a perception by many male readers and some writers who didn't appreciate women in their sandbox, even though we were always in them.
We did have a question down here. Don't a lot of female horror writers use male pseudonyms?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know who does. I mean, you know, maybe some still do. I have no idea.
There are some that use initials, but
but I'm not sure. It may not be because they're female. It could be because of their day job. There are a lot of reasons. Because they're first books, because they're doing a different genre, and when you're doing 3 to 4 different genres, your publisher may want to separate that voice from another. I mean, Joyce Carol Oates has 2 or 3 synonyms because she writes too much, and her publishers, you know, want to. for a while they were separating her thriller books,
Mhm.
and I forget what. I mean, they were female names, and I'm blanking on what they were. But she used a different name for her more crime books, and then I think it just collapsed, and she's all her own stuff again, her own name.
Cheryl Alexander asks, wasn't Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, the first horror writer?
Also, the science fiction. Well,
Yeah.
when did Frankenstein come out before Dracula? I don't remember the date.
Yes. Frankenstein's 1818, Dracula's 1899.
Okay.
So significantly before.
I mean, yeah, that might have been early. I think she wrote the first science fiction novel. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure, Frankenstein.
And Frankenstein is not really a horror novel.
No, it has horrific elements.
Of course, it's science fiction horror. Well, you know
What it
what?
got turned into was, but it was philosophy more than.
I'm not sure. Forget that. I mean, philosophy. Come on. So you're just going to say it's a philosophical treatise? No. But anyway, I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure I actually read Frankenstein. I'm trying to remember if I've read it. I mean, I've seen.
I'm speaking from having read it.
And I don't know. I honestly don't know. But so I'd have to read it to see if I would consider it a horror novel. But from what I know of it, I think I would consider it both.
Yeah. Another book that came from that same Year Without a Summer that Mary produced, Frankenstein, was Nosferatu, which is not as well known, but is a vampire novel.
Who wrote the book? Who wrote the novel?
God, it was Lord Byron's doctor. I cannot remember.
Nosferatu. It was called the Vampire. Vampyre, right? Polidori.
Yeah.
It wasn't called Nosferatu. That was a movie.
Yeah.
I don't think
there was a book, and it came out of that.
Polidori, she's right.
Yeah. Tom has the name. Yeah.
What's the name?
Ellen had it.
The
Polidori.
Vampire with a Y. It was not called Nosferatu.
Yeah, but it came out of the same literary challenge.
Yeah. When did I mean, I'm sorry that I don't know the dates of everybody. When did H.G. Wells live?
He was later.
Early 20th century.
He was later.
Late 19th, early 20th century.
So I'm trying to remember the early.
Doyle and Stoker.
And then there's the Castle of Otranto. There's a whole thing. There are like histories about who did the first horror. I mean, yeah. So you can go back and back and back and find horror things. Mm-hmm. When I did my ghost story anthologies in the intro, I was saying, well, they're ghosts forever. Macbeth, that was ghost.
Yeah.
So there's
back into Greek myth. There are horror stories within there.
Most of Bulfinch's mythology is horror. I mean, all these poor women get raped by gods, and then that's kind of horrific.
People get chased by beasts through mazes.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, there are bits.
Kronos eating his children.
Right. So I don't know if you would consider that. You know what? I realize I know about Kronos eating his children, but is that an actual story, or is that just?
Yeah. It's part of the story.
It's one of the myths.
Well, then, fairy tales. Well, Grimm too.
Yeah.
It's not just beyond Grimm, but Grimm's tales were pretty horrific.
Oh yeah. But and the fact that the Catholic Church cleaned up a lot of the Grimm stories, they're still pretty horrific.
I don't know if it was the Catholic Church or just people, who
they were multiply revised and
I mean, the whole thing, like the original Cinderella, the father was the abuser, and when he finds her again as a servant in the prince's castle, she said she'd rather scrub the latrines of the prince than to ever be his daughter again. Whoever edited Grimm and cleaned it up said, no, a father, that's not a crime. The father can't be an abuser. It has to be a stepmother. But it's, a common Cinderella story is very common throughout the world as a morality tale, to be kind to your children. Don't abuse your children. So anyway, original Grimm is very grim.
Yeah.
Ellen, do you have any advice for writers in the speculative fiction genre who want to move into writing horror?
Just write it. Just no, I mean, find the market after. I mean, if you really want to write horror, first of all, why do you want to write horror? Just because you're interested in it, or you think it's a good market thing? If you want to write it, just do it. That's the only. And if you're not sure of, it doesn't matter that much initially if it's horror or dark fantasy. I mean, if you want to write dark material, just write it, and then figure out afterwards where it might fit. And again, I'm talking about short stories. A novel, of course, takes much more time to deal with that and to make that commitment. But with short fiction, you can go all over the place and find markets for everything. There's so many markets out there for speculative fiction and horror in general.
I'm actually asking it for a reason. A lot of speculative writers I know are involved in workshops, they're involved in critique groups, they're involved in various social activities. And if the other folks working around with them are not into horror, they can get really, really inappropriate critiques along the line of, no mother would ever injure her child, and that kind of stuff. And I wondered if you had any advice. Should people go and find a horror group?
Yes. If you can find one, I would definitely just suggest that. But an interesting thing is, a lot of the people who we know as horror writers started out as science fiction writers. I mean, Charlie Grant, Alan Ryan, Tom Monteleone, they all wrote science fiction initially and then moved into horror. Now, why they did, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are interviews with them saying why, probably. But no, for new writers now, if you want to move in, if you want to write horror or even really, really dark fantasy and your group is not encouraging you and don't get it, then I would leave that group. Then you have to find people who understand what you're at least trying to do, even if you're not doing it well. Yet. So yeah, I think if you're in a science fiction workshop, or if it's mixed, that's tough too, because then everyone's going to have, it's going to be more problematic if there's a group that's science fiction people and horror, because usually there's crossover in writers, but there's less crossover in readers, I think, between straight science fiction people and straight horror people. Right.
So I know about all these science fiction and fantasy writing groups and programs. Does Horror Writers of America have similar things, similar developmental groups?
Actually, it's the Horror Writers Association. I knew because we changed it. But yeah, well, if you join HWA, we have there are chapters. I mean, there are chapters all over the country. Some of them probably do run writing workshops, or not workshops necessarily, but maybe. I mean, I'm not sure. But if you get in with the horror writers, I mean, joining HWA is not a bad thing, because also there's a mentor program, although that's always backed up. There are never enough mentors for the mentees. But it can help you find markets, and it can help you connect with other writers. There's the Facebook page. I don't remember people asking is there a writing workshop in this area? But I don't see why people can't, or, start writing workshops, just talking to each other on Facebook and making that connection. Although I think anyone can see that page on Facebook. So anyone who's not, even if you're not a member, I believe you can go and look at it, So yeah, I would actually, I'm a trustee, so I have, if you want to say, I have a vested interest, but it's not that vested. But yeah, I mean, I do think it's good for new horror writers who are trying to find connections with other horror writers. I think it might be the best way. And we'll try to go to some conventions. I mean, StokerCon has writing workshops, and they have Horror University. And actually HWA has Horror University, which is lectures online given by experts about things that we pay for. And I think anyone can go. I don't think you have to be a member. It may be cheaper if you're a member. So yes, there are places to go to that can help a horror writer, specifically someone new to the field who's not feeling comfortable with the science fiction people or fantasy people.
Some critiques critique groups are horror stories in themselves,
that-
and I've been in a couple.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's an important thing, that if you're not getting what you need out of a writing workshop, leave it. If you're not getting, I'm not saying you should get praise all the time, but if you're just getting beaten down all the time, or people obviously do not get what you're doing. I mean, the thing is, with any writing workshop, you have to judge, is this a good advice or is that bad advice? I mean, I've taught Clarion West several times, and some of the critiques are just, you'll learn to ignore them because they don't get it, what you're doing at all. And others, will be very helpful. And you have to learn to judge what's useful to your writing.
Okay. We're down to 5 minutes. So, Ellen, what do you have recently coming out?
This just came out. Yeah. This is Another Horrors, although it's
and it's backwards.
Reversed.
On my screen. Christmas horror.
Christmas Another Horrors. It's a winter solstice anthology, and it's got all kinds of original stories about different. It was meant to be international, and it is somewhat international, but not as international as I would have liked. People who from other cultures were asked, and other countries, and some of them just didn't do it. They couldn't do it. And but it's I think it's a pretty good anthology. I'm happy with it. And it came out October 24th, went into a second printing. Of course, as I said, I don't know what the first printing was, so that may be meaningless. But yeah, it's and it's got a great cover. And it's got, some really, if you want to see what's happening in horror, these are some good writers. Stephen Graham Jones, Alma Katsu. Alma Katsu was a CIA, well, she was a government employee. I don't know what part of the government.
Okay.
Anyway, she wrote some really excellent novels. The Hunger, which was the Donner Party kind of thing with werewolves, I think. And it's very, very good.
Bob has put a link up in
Story.
on the comment section.
Right.
So, okay.
Undercore, The Salt Heavy is really excellent. It's about vicious mermaids, and it's pretty gross. But it's
Okay, Karen, what do you have coming up?
I was actually just in a horror anthology about the holidays from Alien Head Press, Gabby Triana's press. They have 2 holiday horror books out.
Well, what are they called? I wonder if I saw them.
Hold on, let me grab one here. Tom will entertain you for a moment.
Okay.
I don't have anything coming out because I don't write or edit. What can I say?
Yeah. Well, while she's looking at that, I'm continuing reissuing reprints of my early books. This is The Glass Dragon, which was my first book, and the reprint came out in June. Just this last week, The Renegade Dragon came out. It'll be wide on the 15th, but currently it's available at bookviewcafe.com. And then one more dragon book, The Wizard's Treasure, will be out in December, or at the end of December. And then I'm going to contemporary fantasy with imps, and I'll have 4 of the test books, and then a brand new book in the same world as the test books, but with different family characters. That'll be out at the end of May, and then I'm going to take a break.
Okay, here's the anthology. It's Literally Dead, and this is book 2.
I think I've seen that. That sounds familiar. And looks. Yeah. Hold on.
Alien Head Press, and it's got some wonderful people.
It came out this year. It came out.
Haley Piper, Ramsey Campbell.
It came out in 23.
It just came out a few minutes ago.
Oh, I haven't got
it. It's really excellent.
Okay, so hopefully the publisher will send me a copy.
I will tell Gaby to do that. And then also, I'm in this cute little one that Jennifer Brozak edited, 99 Tiny Terrors, and it's all horror flash.
Okay, could you get her to send me that too? I know I didn't.
I will do that.
Thank you. Oh, and I just want to recommend one more novella that I published, Wild Spaces by S.L. Coney, which is a wonderful novella. It's melancholy. It's been described as Rick McCannon's boy's life combined with tentacles. And it's just really very moving, melancholy, upsetting, and horrific. but it's a slow boil. I mean, it's basically a happy family and their dog that arrives mysteriously, and then the grandfather, from the point of view of the boy, and the grandfather comes, and everything gets screwed up very badly.
I want to generalize something that Ellen just said for her, which is if you have published something that falls into the horror genre, make sure that the publisher sends a copy to Ellen.
Yes, even though I'm inundated, I need to be inundated. I'm like I'm drowning in books, but I need to see them.
And if you know a publisher who is publishing horror, make sure they send it to
Yes,
Ellen.
and I have the address, the mailing, the call for submissions on my blog. It's also pinned on my Facebook page. The call for submissions for. I'm only looking at 23 right now, even though 24 is coming up. But no, I have no room for 24 stuff.
Yeah, you will.
I
You'll have
will.
plenty of room for it
I will have
after
to make
the first
room.
of the year.
Yes, and the best of the year number 15 is unfortunately not coming out to January 16th or something, or 12th, which I'm not unhappy about. I told my editor he has to push me and tell me when the hard deadline is next time, because I do not want to have the book coming out next year. So usually comes out. It should have been out this year.
Mhm.
It'll be out in a month and a half.
Okay, Bob, back to you. We've talked our throats dry over the last hour.
Oh, you guys have done wonderful, and it is great to hear the insights from Ellen here about how what she's doing works and how she gets it there, etc. And also, Karen, you and Phil, and to a lesser degree, Tom, since he stayed quiet so much. Yeah, I deeply appreciate it. Now, but Tom, since you're
Yes.
sitting right here,
Mm-hmm.
how about you tell me what we're doing next week?
Well, I've got Gilles Poitras, or Giles Poitras, depending on how you feel like pronouncing it, talking about anime and anime in Tokyo and Tokyo in anime. And I hope to have somebody else to keep the conversation flowing because it works much better if we've got three people. We're going to talk a lot about what's been going on. Gilles just recently wrote a book called Tokyo Stroll, which is about walking tours of Tokyo. Not so much tours as area by area. What's cool in this place? What's been here for a long time, and what's actually happening that's fun?
And some of it is anime related.
Yes.
Mhm.
There are sections of town where you can find statues of anime characters, or the clock that Studio Ghibli built, which is visible from the Yamanote line, and is just totally cool.
Oh. Hey, yeah, my experience with anime is old enough. It was about a battleship.
Cruiser Yamato. Yes.
I love that show.
And
Well,
We used to watch it when I was in the Navy. But that said, thank you all for being here. Go buy Ellen's books. Go buy Karen's new anthology out by Jennifer Brozak. Jennifer Brozak is a wonderful human being. She was kind enough when we were starting this enterprise to sit down. Her and her partner sat down with us and gave us some good pointers. And so it's always good to be able to say there are good people out there that are there for the rest of us. That said,
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Thank
It's
you,
been
Ellen. This is
very
great.
educational and entertaining.
and
Good to see
Ellen,
you,
we
Ellen.
will have you back anytime you want.
Okay.
You've got a book coming out. We will be glad to have you on here to promote it,
Okay.
because that's that's what we do.
Thank
So that said, later, guys, and I'm going to end it. And now, by the way, I'll warn you, it takes about 15 seconds. So don't say anything like, "Oh, thank God that's over."